Welcome to Educate, Inform, and Challenge. My name is Teresa McLennan. I'm the Executive Director of the Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie. We're really glad and thankful that you have joined us today. Our program is about the lives and experiences of women. We're talking about women from all walks of life and their experiences of opportunities for leadership, gender equity, violence against women. We really are thankful that you have come along with us to have these very open and frank conversations so that we can challenge our thinking and then motivate us to change our actions. Before we begin and introduce our wonderful guest today, I would like to thank our Indigenous partners for allowing us to share in this space, for allowing us to share in this land so that we can have this open dialogue. So we thank you so much. So today I am very, very pleased to welcome my guest, Sarah Cunningham. And Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself and just a little background about yourself to our viewers today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Teresa. My name is Sarah Cunningham. I'm the Women's Advocate Project Coordinator for the Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie. I am Indigenous as well. My name is Gahandikwe Shishwabik Nadishnaka Zmakwadudam Ramadojnaba. So I am, my name, it is Red Earth Woman. And with our names comes roles and responsibilities. And with that, it is to flourish, to always flourish no matter where I am. My Bear Clan, I want to talk a little bit about Bear Clans, is natural healers, the medicine, really knowledgeable of the medicine, but ultimately they're our protectors. They are the family protectors and the community protectors within our First Nations. And I'm very proud to be from Arama First Nation here in Simcoe County.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. And, you know, at that introduction to yourself is really going to be at the forefront of everything that we're talking about today. And so June is National Indigenous History Month. Can you help us all to understand the importance of that month?
To be able to celebrate it openly. That's a huge celebration right there. June is also one of our solstices, our summer solstice months. And through that, there's, in the summer months, there was a lot of trading that would happen, visiting and prepping for, harvest and just that good nutrients that we get from our Mother Earth. So June has always been recognized within our culture. But for it to be openly recognized, to share it with our surrounding communities, it really shows on how far that we have come to be able to openly celebrate and to share our language, for us to even speak our language. At one time, we weren't allowed to speak our language, to even have ceremonies. If you look at a lot of the laws, especially out in BC, the potlatch ceremonies, they were outlawed. Many reserves were not able to practice that. So for us, it's to really celebrate and also to bring them back. A lot of the language has been lost, and through not being able to practice those ceremonies, a lot has been lost. And so for us to be able to come together, and luckily we weren't completely lost, just buried for a little bit. And so a lot of them, it's coming back. We're seeing it more and more visibility. We still have lots of work to do though.
So I want to mention to our viewers before you and I continue our conversation, our agency supports women and their children who have an experience of violence. And so today, as we have our conversation, I do just want to caution our viewers that if at any point you're listening to this conversation today, and it may be triggering something for you or bringing up something that is very traumatic for you, please take a moment and be very kind to yourself in our conversation today. We want you to be well, And we do want, though, to be able to have these very, very important conversations. So having said that, Sarah, I think it is wonderful for us to dive into the importance, the celebration for National Indigenous Month. I would like to start to talk about the experiences in particular for our Indigenous women and young girls. So I know that that is a very complex, big conversation for us to have, and a very sensitive one. Mm-hmm. Where would you like to start us off in diving into this conversation?
Well, thank you for mentioning that. Yes, I think, especially when it comes to our Indigenous women, right? They are sacred. All of our women are sacred across Turtle Island and all around the world. They are our caretakers as well as our life givers, that bringing life into this world to carry that water within them and that life. And so we hold our Indigenous women at the center with our children. And so part of the celebrations, when I think about celebrations, there's also, I need to remember our murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls that are not dancing with us, that are not celebrating with us physically here on Mother Earth. And this came a little near and dear for me, especially with our murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. My girlfriend in high school, we were best friends. She was kind of like my little sister. When I first moved to that city, that town, everyone oh, you must be related to Rachel. And I'm like, just kind of looking, I'm like, no, I don't know who this Rachel is. So I finally met her a couple of days later and I was like, oh my gosh, this woman is just gorgeous. And so she kind of took me under her wing. She was a couple years older than I was. And so she kind of took me under her wing, introduced me to different people, kind of stay away from this crowd, stay away from those guys, and that. And so I had a good, solid couple of years with her while we were in high school. I got a call in 2007, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her body was found in Coburg. She had experienced blunt force trauma to her head. So at this time, I was 25. She was 28 years old when they had discovered her body. That was on November 12th in 2007. The autopsy had come back and they had put her time of death in late November. So late October. So it's been a few days. So when I was sitting there at the funeral, I couldn't imagine, how can this happen? How could this happen to somebody that I know? This beautiful, outspoken woman, fierce. She really believed she had no problem stepping up for anybody, and especially for the women as well. She was very much kind of like a big sister almost role that she took from me. And so we had gone through, I was sitting there at her funeral and I said, I can't, it's wow. I couldn't believe it. So it really started, I had always worked in the violence against women's kind of sector in some way, shape, or form, especially in our nonprofit organizations. And it really shook me because now she's a stat. She taught me how to not become a stat. And so in 2010, there was a lot of motion that was happening around why are a lot of our murdered and missing Indigenous girls going missing or murdered. And so the Native Women's Association of Canada kind of really took the lead on this. And from over 20 years, just based upon some reports, family and survivors, there was at that time about 582 cases over 20 years. So in 2013, they started digging a little bit deeper with Marianne. She was doing her PhD. And she had found 824 cases. Then we have the Truth and Reconciliation that came out in 2015. And they came out that actually I had identified the stat of their race that was actually documented. And they had released that it was 1,181 recorded at the time. They used Aboriginal females. You have to take into consideration Indigenous women are only 4% of the population. So if you combine those numbers, it was 24% of murdered women are Indigenous. And that's just in 2015.
So before we continue on, because I want to make sure that I'm understanding and that we are conveying this vital piece of information, is that there's a disproportionately high amount of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Am I encapsulating that fact when I say disproportionately high amount?
Absolutely, especially when you look at the population. You look at the population and how widespread Canada is. Absolutely.
Okay. And so we're going to be taking a short break, and then we're going to definitely come back to this conversation, because I also think that it is important for us to dive in deeper to this. And I think, Sarah, would I be safe and fair to say that even though we've had that number of 1,181, that does not truly reflect the true amount of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That number is much greater.
The number is much greater. And there's so much that we can talk about in terms of why the number is disproportionately higher for the Indigenous community of women, but then also how come the numbers are not accurately recorded as well. There's so much for us to talk about. We really encourage our viewers, please stay with us today. This is an insightful, important conversation that we want to have. And we really hope that this is going to provide that education that we all need and challenge our thinking and our knowledge. So please stay with us. We will be right back. Welcome back to our program. We are really happy to be joined by Sarah Cunningham. And if you've just joined us, we are talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And again, we want to be very sensitive to our viewers that we are talking about violence against women. And if there is anything at any time that you feel is just too heavy for you to listen to, we do encourage you to take care, think about your wellness. And if you need to take a step off from listening to our conversation today, please do so. So welcome back, Sarah. So we have been diving into a very large conversation, and which warrants so much more conversation. I want to pick up our conversation, and I want to ask the question, and I know it is a huge question, Sarah. Why is there a higher incidence of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls than any other group in Canada? Can you even start to try and unravel that for us?
Well, the National Inquiry recommendations and their reports also try to answer that. And out of the recommendations, it's 191 pages of how many different levels of government can assist with those recommendations, whether it's the federal, provincial, municipality, and Indigenous governments. However, we again need to really take a look at the systematic causes of all forms of violence, and especially when we're taking a look at the Indigenous women. Indigenous women are 12 times more likely to be murdered than any other woman in Canada. So that is 16% more than Caucasian women, as well as they are 7 times more likely to be targeted by serial killers, so strangers, than any other race in Canada or any other populations here in Canada. So when we're talking about those numbers, they're high. And so when we've had to push for this national inquiry for us to learn about institutional policies, practices, the implementation response to violence, the experience of the survivors, what had occurred. Mm-hmm.
Sarah, can I just ask for your clarification then, because 12 times, 7 times, 60% more. Those are incredible numbers. The numbers that we have, right now in terms of statistics,
yep.
And we talked about that just a little bit before. Are those numbers accurate? And if not, then would that not mean that those numbers of 12 times, 7 times, 60% are even higher?
Absolutely. So the government had a couple years back now, they have implemented with their stats, like we see it all the time, right, in our shelters, but of not releasing how or their race, their origin, whether or not if it was man to man or woman on woman. So we don't now know how many, if it's not being reported, but the police and RCMP now don't have to report the backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. So we are truly not even getting the tip of the iceberg here. We are not getting the truly accurate numbers of the depth of this issue.
Yeah, and we have, the Femicide in Canada, that organization, they do every year, they put out the report of how many women have been killed in Canada. So if we even look back in 2020, there was 160 women that were killed by violence alone here in Canada. So out of those 160, they were only able to get some background information of those women, whether or not how they identified themselves as. There was only 128 that had their background, their race and origin of the people. And so out of those 128, there was 30 Indigenous women that were killed in Canada last year. And this is just by violence. And we're not talking about what's happening in our healthcare systems. It's men and domestic violence.
Yeah. So gender-based violence, which is, of course, gender-based violence. So violence that is targeted specifically because we are women.
Women and then Indigenous.
And Indigenous, absolutely. And I will just say from a agency shelter perspective, when we do December 6th, the Day of Remembrance, about women who've been killed over the previous year, we know that the total number, and of course, the Indigenous women and young girls, the total number of all women who have actually been murdered by their abusers is still underrepresented. And we still don't have the accurate numbers for the global picture for all women who've been murdered. And so there is that piece of it, of course, and then to highlight the Indigenous women and girls, right? So I think it's important for our community to recognize that you may see a number that gets reported in the news. That is not the accurate number, truly, of the amount of global women who have been murdered, and of course, the Indigenous women.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do want to clarify that we are talking about violence, gender-based violence, because we see it across Canada. Our women just recently, I'm not going to mention her name, it hasn't been a year yet, in Quebec.
Yes.
So
do you want to provide an education to us about not saying her name?
My teaching is that after a year has passed, is that they need to travel up to the spirit world, to be embraced by our ancestors, for them to have that visit with them, and for them to be able to go there, so that when that full year around all the moons and the seasons, that we're also healing. She's never forgotten, but she needs to make that journey home first. And so do we try to live without her. And it's very painful. And that's part of some healing processes that happen within the community. So that's also it's for me, I'm going to go by my teachings in regards to that, because we don't want to call her back too soon.
Yeah. And I just, you know what, you kind of led us into that. And I think it is just a really wonderful piece of history and culture that I think is worth for our viewers to recognize the importance of that. And so we thank you for that so much. And so we have only about 5 minutes left. And again, such an important, large topic for us to dive into. Can you talk to us about what are we doing to address this issue for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls?
We're having the conversation. That's the beginning, to really recognize that this is happening, that there are systematic causes, and also taking a look at the colonial genocide to really kind of learn about that term and the structures that have oppressed, that have made the institutional policies that have oppressed to that discrimination and racism and gender-based violence that has led up to this point. And especially within our Indigenous history here in Canada, it's a very long, systematic history. And so really trying to take a look at some of the effective actions, really listening to the survivor's story, and because they know they've lived some of the violence. We also have a high number of women being trafficked and bought and sold here in Canada. We know that Ontario has the highest rate of human trafficking clients. 60% is happening here in Ontario. And so when you take a look at a lot of those, hearing the stories of the women that have been able to flee that area, we play a huge role with the police, because they need safety and security. We hear a lot of stories that safety and security is denied, even at the shelter. We have so many women that need our help, that need a safe place to go. And when we have to take that call and say, I'm sorry, we're full. And her safety and her security is denied.
And I thank you for saying that, Sarah, because, we speak very openly from our shelter perspective, advocating and representing the women who come to us, that while we have 27 beds, we usually run closer to 35. And at 35, we are having to turn away over 500 women every year to other shelters because we are full. And when I hear someone in our community say, I didn't think that was happening here in the city of Barrie, I didn't think that women were being abused, the numbers never lie. And, certainly, you and I have a shared experience of knowing the amount of women that call our crisis line at any time of the day or night who are asking for somewhere to go. So thank you for, really highlighting that point, because we want our community to recognize the prevalence right here in the city of Barrie, and certainly Barrie is considered a gateway for human trafficking. So to circle back, to our really important conversation today, what I feel I hear is that we need to have some devoted attention and money towards policing, policy, and people having conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to really highlight the safety and security, because we cannot deny our women any longer.
Yeah. So Sarah, could you reference that report where people could go if they wanted to learn some more information?
Absolutely. So we're also going to have it highlighted at the bottom there. But it's the National Inquiry of Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls. There is a final report. It's over 800 pages. There's also the master recommendations. So they've really highlighted, and I love it. It's one of a kind, 19 themes, and they color coded what municipality and level of government should be doing what.
You know what? That is a really great place for us to end today. Sarah, thank you so much. Thank you for broadening our education and information. Thank you, our viewers, for being with us. Take care. We'll see you soon.